Welcome back, everyone, and welcome back to all of you that's always been here listening. I'm your host here, Ash, and we are the OnReviewCast, and your number one go-to show for reviewing all things media, TV shows, movies, all that stuff. Want to get a review session? Come on over to the podcast and listen to Ash, review on OnReviewCast. Today we're taking a look at Squid Game Episode 2, Season 2, of course, of the Squid Game. And just like every other episode, like we always go through, we're going to give our episode breakdown, courtesy of Fandom. And the episode breakdown goes like this. Episode 2 is called Halloween Party. It's the second episode of the second season of Squid Game, and it's the 11th episode of the series overall. Synopsis. Gi-hun finally gets a hold of an invitation marked for Halloween Day. An intense moment facing Jun-ho, they reveal the truths to each other. So, yeah. This episode was written by Ha Dong-hyuk, like we always know him, and directed by Ha Dong-hyuk. And the air date was December 26, 2024. Yeah, so, just jumping right into this episode. I mean, this episode kind of just like comes off the heels of the last one, where it kind of starts off right after the game, the deadly game of them playing the Russian roulette that we talked about previously in the previous episode before. Now, basically what happens is Jun-ho, who has essentially been stalking Gi-hun, it goes like this, but who has essentially been stalking Gi-hun and stalking this, it's been like in the kind of like the B background, the B roll of this kind of like thing that's basically been going on, comes into the building that essentially Gi-hun has bought. Something I guess I want to say that some people probably didn't really notice is that I think I was watching this with someone the first time around, and like they didn't really notice the fact that Gi-hun had bought this building, and they were kind of like, why he's going into every room? It's like, the people live there. I was like, no, dude, like he bought the entire thing. That's how rich he is, and that's what. But yeah, so I mean, like the Gi-hun Jun-ho is going through every building, and he's searching through, and he's looking for essentially for any signs of wrongdoing, because he's a cop. He's going through. So upon going through and trying to find some remnants of some illegal actions, he finds one of the loan shark monsters from the first act that was playing rock paper scissors. Remember that guy, the guy that actually survived? He actually finds him, which is ironic. I thought that, because like I would have thought that, like, just watching the entire series, I was like, jokes on you guys, like, he's playing rock, paper, scissors with these motherfuckers, but, like, realistically, he's just probably gonna kill them both, honestly. Like, but it's not the case. So anyway, Jun-ho comes running in, he comes saving the first guy that was playing rock, paper, scissors, and he comes and saves him, I guess. He asks him a bunch of questions, and then eventually finds the room that Gi-hun's actually in. Obviously, hovering over a dead body, he's suspecting the worst, being a police officer. He arrests him. He's like, hey, you over there, get your hands behind your back. You had the right to remain silent, blah, 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 all this stuff. He's seen television, police officer before. We know how that shit goes. And as he's patting him down, he searched him, he's just about to arrest him, I guess, throw some cuffs on him. The guy that was with Mr. Kim, the other gangster, like I said, he saved first, hits him over the head with a fucking trash can. Hilariously hits him over the head with a fucking trash can. Yeah, and he basically goes on to essentially explain to him that he was working with Mr. Kim, and he was in all of these photos, and he's one of the mobsters, and explaining to him basically everything that's happened to him in the first episode, how they play rock officers, and how this motherfucker murdered Mr. Kim, essentially, and found him. And what was kind of strange about that scene and that whole thing? Why was he like almost naked? Like what the hell was that? Was that something just like for the fangirls out there? We had to show him like just in these like boxers or whatever it is. Like why did he have to be? What did he do to him? You know what I mean? Like, oh my god! Like why did he strip him down? Maybe for safety purposes, I assume, or something like that. I guess. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so moving on with the story, essentially, so he knocks the cop out, and what Gi-hun essentially finds from the guy that was playing the Russian roulette game with him is that he finds the initial card with this square, the triangle, and the circle on it. The famous card that we are familiar with for the invitation for the games. And I find this to be very interesting because, except this wasn't necessarily an invitation to the games, this is an invitation to the Halloween party, as we find out later inside of the show. Now, something really interesting happens in the next scene. In the next scene, we meet a young woman that the story in this is expansive a little bit. Like, and upon first watch, I'll just admit to you guys, like, it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to necessarily be, because I thought that this was just like another person we're meeting that's down on their luck, and that's probably gonna in one way or another we're gonna learn about them, and I thought that like this person was gonna be the new like Gi-hun, new star of the Squid Games perspective kind of show kind of thing. We find out later in this episode that is not the case, and we get a little more expansiveness on her story. But it first turns out that she is sleeping in a car, and it appears that she's actually essentially homeless. And a police officer comes over to her and essentially asks her to, move out of this parking lot because she's not essentially supposed to be here. So, not wanting to cause any trouble or whatever, she says that she's gonna move, and once she moves within a certain time period, it's basically gonna be fine. The officer's essentially fine with it. And this is just like a little teaser, I think, just to show we have some more new characters coming into the actual game. And like I said, when I first saw this, I thought that that was gonna be a new actual main character, but more on that later. So we have a scene now where that goes on where we actually have the interaction with Jun-ho and Gi-hun. And this is a very, on review, this is a very interesting conversation and perspective if you actually think about it. The reason that this is actually interesting is because, it's kind of like they're looking for the same guy, but they obviously have two intentions of finding this certain individual. And this is the first time we actually ever see them interact outside, face to face anyway, because they actually do a flashback and they actually show that Gi-hun was actually approached by Jun-ho inside of the first games, but he was masked and he didn't know who he was, and he reminds him of that, and we get that little flashback. And essentially what happens is that Gi-hun tells Jun-ho his plans of actually wanting to basically take down the system, and he wants to go after the man who is operating this entire thing, but he knows it won't just stop with him. He wants to basically dismantle this whole system of the games, and he doesn't want anybody else to die. Which, again, we'll go into the whole later depths of that in the later episodes. But for now, this is essentially what happens. He gets the invitation to go to this Halloween party, essentially, and he tells Jun-ho essentially about the fact that he's also trying to find the head person of this. Now, watching this upon first watch, what's interesting is I wasn't really necessarily thinking about it, but Jun-ho, like I said before, Jun-ho wants to find the main guy that's in charge, the Black Mass, for different reasons. We know that that's actually his brother, who is behind that Black Mass. And when Gi-hun actually tells him that he wants to find him, and he does actually want to kill him, Jun-ho actually plays along, and he kind of like lies to Gi-hun and tells him he doesn't know who's behind the Black Mask, and he doesn't know what he looks like, which is a lie. And I think what's interesting about this is he's been believing it so hardly himself, and I've been believing it so hardly myself, that he wants to essentially just forget about the fact that his brother is essentially out there. He doesn't want to think about that. He doesn't want to. It's the idea of his brother that's basically kind of like the absence of mind. I didn't even notice that he was actually like lying to him when he said this, but on review I had to be like, oh yeah, he wants to actually, we don't even really know if he wants to really necessarily kill his brother. Yeah, his brother shot him, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he has intentions of killing him. You might want to just go bring him in or bring him to justice, or ask him questions like, what the fuck was this about? Why the fuck are you with these people? A little bit more on that later into that background. But anyway, we find that essentially, eventually the Gi-hun and Jun-ho team up. Actually, they find that they have similar motives and they want to do the same thing, so they team up along with the guy from the loan shark. And essentially, what happens is that he finds them, he shows them the amount of money that he's basically working with, and he's like, you know what, we're gonna get these motherfuckers, and I'm gonna use this money to actually fight down, take down the man. And he also, Gi-hun also shows them assortment of weapons that he's been collecting over the years to actually build an army to fight, to fucking take them down. And now we just need soldiers, right? Because essentially that's what it just boils down to. Yeah. So in the next couple of scenes, we get an interaction with the little girl that is actually at a theme park, going to those Disneyland fucking things. And I never really thought about it before, but what is interesting is that in these theme parks, right, it's very similar, if you think about it, to the whole operation with the Squid Game, with the whole Squid Game parallel of not knowing who these people are behind these masks, but they're providing some kind of like service to you, and they're always essentially kind of around. It's creepy, if anything, and it's weird how, I guess from a child's perspective who doesn't necessarily know, who is ignorant to certain things and certain dangers to the world, that they think when they just see a bunch of colors and a bunch of animals and a bunch of stuff, things that make them essentially smile and make them happy. But from an adult perspective, which is essentially what's happening within Squid Game, where you have these masked people all around, they don't say much, they do more actions than they say. It's kind of fucking creepy, actually. It's kind of fucking creepy, right? I drew that parallel, and I was kind of like, wow, like just like how, you know, in the games they have the triangle, square, and the circle guys that also always follow them around. This is similar to when you're in the theme park. They're the children in the theme park, but only they're adults now, and from an adult's perspective, it's very, very scary, rather than from a child's perspective. They're all happy and thinking that, you know, it's all good. And the interaction was essentially that the little girl had gone into the dressing room and found all the adults in there, and they were dressed, and they all pretended, always keep on the mask, is essentially the motto, and keep the illusion up for the child, right? So they wouldn't freak out. I mean, and it was just essentially basically what happened, because one of the guys came in there without the mask on, or without the children's mask on, and she started freaking the fuck right out, and her dad had to come and get her and take her out of the room. Dad of the year, by the way. I want to talk about that real quick. Oh my gosh, this guy. Why was she? This is and this is not the first time, but more on this later. But this is not the first time within this episode that this child, you know, has been misplaced, or gone wandering off. And we find out later that the dad is actually working for the theme park, but at the same time, you know, I mean, you watch your kid, your responsibilities. I mean, that's the onus on you to watch your kid. Like, anything could happen to this child, and who wandered into this dressing room or whatever. And it's just horrible parenting. Horrible parenting. Realistically. Anyway, we cut back to the girl that we initially met. We thought that was essentially homeless. She's working at the theme park, and she was working under the bunny mask, essentially, within there. And she has a conversation, I guess, with someone who she is trying to get to investigate or find a child for her. And this is... again, interesting, because we're getting a little bit of backstory on this woman who, again, I assume on the first watch that, you know, this is going to be a main player or a main star within the actual show. This person is of some kind of significance. It's how they kind of like built the story. So this in the background is essentially that she's looking for a baby or a child, essentially, that was lost in some kind of Korean conflict or something like that. And it's just very interesting how all this backstory, all this like details we're getting. Like I said, like I swear this really convinced me that she was going to be essentially a main character with respects to this. But like I said before, more on that later. So we have a conversation that what happens next is we have a conversation with Jun-ho's mom, And Jun-ho basically expresses that he, you get a little bit more information about that Eno is just like his wife had died, and we get a little bit more, I think, more sympathy points for and understanding of kind of the person who he is, which is essentially the guy behind the mask. And Eno has gone through obviously some kind of trauma and troubles in his life in terms of like losing his wife, and I think he was involved in some kind of like conflict with like some other people in terms of like actually trying to pay for maybe like his wife's like procedures, and it seems like that seems to be the situation that seems to be like a legit story if it's discussed with essentially between his family. And there has to be something going on or something deeper going on that had pulled him into these Squid Games to motivate him to start killing people and doing X, Y, and Z for maybe, I don't know, maybe it started off with money to save his wife, and maybe it just developed into something else. But it's just a little teaser, a little taste of something more essentially more to come. Now within this episode, we're jumping a little bit ahead. We actually get to the actual Halloween party to which Gi-hun is taking part in. Very interesting. The guys even say it in the show that under the guise of the whole Halloween and mask and weird things actually happening on this night, they actually sneak that's happening into the club, into the rave club. They actually sneak into this rave club, and the guys from the actual Squid Game essentially show up. It was a weird thing to see in a weird parallel, because like in the real world, it's kind of like if we actually saw like one of these guys of the Squid Games, it's like, okay, this guy's dressing up as like a Squid Game character, like whatever, he's calling like as a Squid Game character. But in their world, in their perspective of like seeing the Squid Game character is also not weird, because again, it's Halloween, everybody's wearing a mask, and it's just like socially acceptable to be dressed up and dressed just a little weirdly. Now, I just noticed something. I wonder why. I just thought about something. Why? What were they gonna do there? Because it wasn't necessarily like maybe this was all. And I guess then we were gonna explain again. I hope the rest of the way the episode essentially goes. But like, what was the point? I'm wondering. Maybe the point was to actually invite Gi-hun here all along, considering what happens next within the next few scenes. But I'm also wondering, like, what was the point in actually them being there? Do you know what I mean? Or him actually having an invitation to this rave in his pocket? Because he didn't like outright, invite Gi-hun there. We don't know if that was initially his orders to actually invite Gi-hun there or whatever. But I'm just trying to get like, why at this rave party? Maybe they were trying to pick up other victims or whatever, or maybe they just thought that they could like maybe this is a meeting spot for them to actually pick off like other random like victims. But anyway, so they go into this club, and they're going in, and they arrive there first, and the guys in the pink jumpsuits and the black mask with the square, circle, and triangles, the bad guys, they're not there yet. And so Jun-ho, who's waiting outside the club, actually see them enter. So they see them when they actually go inside, and they see two of them, and one of the squares actually comes up behind Gi-hun and approaches him, and he makes eye contact with him, and he walks off. And then one of the triangles actually finds the guy from the loan shark guy who's wearing the head horse thing, and actually tases him and leaves him at the bar, essentially separating the two. And just a little tidbit, guys, if you guys didn't know about this, in terms of like what the actual square, triangle, and circle things are, people are, or what their missions and what their designations are, essentially in terms of the games. If you haven't really been paying attention, the triangles are obviously killers, right? And the circles are obviously, they're like lapdogs, and like they take the dead bodies and they burn them, and they're the less the least dangerous to the lowest ranking ones. So lowest ranking ones circle, mid ranking ones are triangles, the killers, and the top dogs who make all the decisions, who move forward with all the authority, are the squares. Essentially, aside from the actual, front man who doesn't even have any shapes at all. It brings up an actual interesting question or an interesting concept of are the X's then the participants that are in the Squid Games? This is the things I think about, guys. Are the X's because it's it's the PlayStation. It's essentially the PlayStation controller, right? There's the X, the square, the triangle, and the circle. But we don't have any X's any X masks in the actual Squid Game. So I'm thinking the X's are, like I said, the contestant. So anyway, within the midst of them getting split up, Gi-hun and this guy, Gi-hun follows the square masked individual outside of the club and leads into a limo that's waiting outside. And Jun-ho is hot on the tails trying to chase after them, but it's too late. Gi-hun is ensnared and captured essentially in this limo, and he's in this limo. But let's not forget that during this episode too, they did put a tracker within his mouth, so they know where Gi-hun is at all times. So in his efforts of actually finding out where what's going on and who these people are and attacking them properly, he always kind of probably had that reassurance of feeling safe that there's this tracker essentially embedded with him, so they could always follow him. So he has some kind of essentially some kind of backup. So anyway, after following entering this vehicle, Gi-hun starts to have a conversation with the front man. He finds the front man, who is he's having a conversation with in this limo once again, similar to that of season 1, and they have this philosophical situation talks about how Gi-hun essentially wants to stop the game, and he wants to stop all of the games. And man, from a perspective of just essentially thinking about it, man, I don't think he quite understands this is bigger than him. This is bigger. This is he's fighting something a little bit huger than just himself. He's fighting human nature. It's not just the fact that these people are out here finding these opportunities and murdering these people. They are willing participants, like how the front man essentially explains it to him in the limo. And essentially, to a certain degree, he's correct. The front man, all of these people that are participating in these games or whatever it is, and they forfeiting their lives, including Gi-hun, they all went there, of their own volition and of their own will. To a certain degree, they participated and were willing to do essentially just that and participating in these deadly games. So they had this long conversation, and Jun-ho, and like I said, the rest of the SEAL Team 6 teams, the Asian SEAL teams, Jun-ho and the rest of the Asian SEAL Team 6 team is hot on the tails, and they're following them, essentially circling around certain areas within the city. Until a fucking sniper takes out one of their wheels in the first car and the second car, and stops them from actually pursuing Gi-hun any further. Now, I thought that this was kind of also obvious, in terms of what would happen, right? Of course, there's a sniper on the top roof, and of course, there's someone stopping them from actually meeting. So Gi-hun has essentially lost his backup now. The 2 cars are gone, and now only Jun-ho, who's in a separate car by himself, is hot on this tail. Is still again hot on his tail, trying to follow him. But of course, Jun-ho's car blows up, and he loses a wheel. So now Gi-hun has zero fucking backup, and desperate and feeling fair for his life, essentially, he pulls out a gun and tries to essentially shoot the back of his car that, of course, we know is going to be bulletproof, right? Even in the back of some of the windows are essentially bulletproof, so shooting the driver is essentially not a void. So strategically, and almost a quick discussion we should probably have about this is, he puts down the gun and he realizes that he's basically in a fuck situation, and he says, put me back in the game. Put me back in the game. Now, the believability of this is actually, to a certain degree, astounding. It's astounding. It's just not, and it's almost somewhat unbelievable. Why would you opt to put yourself back in the game until you remember that? Okay, wait a minute. This motherfucker has a tracker in his and essentially in his mouth, and it's probably the same. It's probably safe to say that that's probably the best way to actually get to the front man and get to him and to basically essentially stop these games forever and figure out what the fuck is going on with him. So I was with him for the most part, but at the same time, the actual because we know how bad the first games were, the actual Squid games were, and how intense those fucking things were. You actually really want to go back, motherfucker? Like, really? Like, really, motherfucker, you really want to go back? Like, I mean, you really want to be put back in that situation? Do you know what I mean? But at the same time, I was kind of like, okay, well, at least he has the reassurance of, like, this time when he goes, people are following him and they know where he is. Do you know what I mean? And he convinces actually the front man to actually let him participate in these games once again, and now Gi-hun's back in the game. So essentially, the limo starts filling up with this knockout gas, and Gi-hun breathes it in, and he gets passed out, and we find out at the end of this conversation that it was the front man that was in the front at the passenger seat all along, and he welcomes him back to the game. Essentially, at the end of this episode, we catch up with the girl who was trying to find, the babies, this baby, or potential, from this particular event that happened with Korea, and we find her entering a truck, the back of a storage truck. And she's going, and in these storage trucks, they have these little containers where we see individuals essentially getting ready. And at first watch, I was kind of like, what the fuck is going on? Why are these people getting ready or whatever? And she starts to, and when the second one she goes in, and I was like, oh, and she goes in and she starts getting dressed, and it's like, oh, she's actually one of the workers for the Squid game. She's a killer. It's like, oh. And it's like, oh. So we're getting a little bit more perspective on in terms of like what the villains are about this season as well. So and it turns out that everybody's getting fucked here. All of the poor people are getting fucked here. The poor people are the killers, the poor people are the helpers, the poor people are participating in this game to possibly win so much X amount of money. It seems absolutely fucking ridiculous to me, in my opinion, honestly, if I'm being real. And like, I guess like I said, like just indicated, like we're gonna see how more is gonna reveal like exactly like how these like villains really operate. And we got a little bit actually of that in season 1 when he infiltrated the police officer, infiltrated the actual Squid game and actually became one of the guardsmen. So we know a little bit about them. We get to see how they live, but we didn't really get to know them so personally in terms of this season 2 kind of thing, where they're showing their backstory, how they're living like normal lives too. And she actually has a soft side she was caring for that child. I brought her hat back, and these are actual people who this big huge corporations essentially fucking taking advantage of. And it brings into question, I suppose, as well. We see her living out of a car. She's not probably living like her best life. Like how much money are they getting really paid like for this to actually murder people? We think that the people that are participating in this game are desperate and dead and all that stuff, but like how desperate do you really have to really be okay to kill people randomly? And she's a triangle too, guys. She's a murderer. To be okay with just murdering people, and I guess just getting to murder people only to just get by a little bit. And I think it speaks further on the social economic standing of where the world, or where their world is, essentially. And as she gets dressed, and that's essentially the end of the episode. So yeah, guys, this one was actually very, very interesting in terms of like I said, it sets the pacing of where we're gonna go, and now we know how Gi-hun re-enters this game. That honestly, man, I don't know, the way they did it and the fact that he got in the game in the first place is just, I don't know. He went through so much. He asked to be put back in. You know what I mean? He asked for this. So it's just like, nope. Like, what's gonna happen? It's just like, oof. Anyway. So, moving on with the show, we're going to go into the next segment that's called Ash's favorite scenes. Yeah. Okay, we talk about the Ash's top favorite scenes of the episode. So this episode was definitely, like I said, very informative one. I think one of my favorite scenes that we didn't really get to talk about too much was the fact that we got to learn a little bit about the girl that was actually the triangle, and how she is going through something horrible in terms of like trying to find this baby or trying to find this child. And we got to learn a little bit more about it. So that first scene of where she actually takes a bunch of pills and she tries to murder herself, we didn't even know. We thought this was going to be the main, because we found Gi-hun in a similar situation, really down on his luck with his child and everything and money and X, Y, and Z. So I thought this was going to be the next main character, but it takes a hard right turn towards the end. So it builds for that. Second favorite scene coming in at number 2. I gotta actually say the second favorite scene for sure in this is when he hits him over the head with the Gi-hun and Jun-ho essentially meeting and them forming this group, and the guy from the mobster guy hitting him over the head and just basically changing everybody's fate by doing that. Essentially showing like everybody we can all work together. We have the same goals, and I think that was just a very interesting concept of bringing them together. And coming at number 1 for Ash's favorite scenes, it's definitely gonna be the scene with the frontman and Gi-hun, actually talking, having a conversation, since this is the top thing, we all wanted, having a conversation since his triumphant victory from the Squid Game. And it was actually they talked about the Matrix, and they talked about the red pill versus the blue pill. I thought that was very interesting as well, and I thought that was very great. And the basic fact, the balls in this motherfucker, the brass balls, the axe to be put back in, amazing. Yeah, so that was Ash's favorite scenes, and I think that before we just sign off here, we're just gonna jump into our next segment of the on review score and Squid Games episode 2, season 2, Squid Games. It's gonna definitely, this episode was it wasn't as strong as the first one, even though it wasn't as strong as the opener. This episode's definitely gonna get for me a 4 out of 5. Still definitely very interesting, very good. The fact that he actually asked to be put back in this thing is amazing, and we got a little bit of insight as to how the triangles or the killers or those people that wear the masks are essentially recruited. They got the card the same way. They're obviously being used. They're invited to participate in this thing, and it looks like she knew what she was doing, and she looked very familiar and very comfortable in that role. So yeah, just gave a little bit of insight as to what the season is going to be about, and I think it was a very interesting thing. All right, so that's basically gonna do the episode, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I do really appreciate it. Don't forget to check us out on all of our socials, the Facebook, the Instagram, the Twitter. Thank you so much for listening. Like I said, and also don't forget to check out my music on Spotify, Ashley Anomaly and the Anomaly Beats. I've heard that his music is actually really good. It's really, you should check that out. It's a lot of rapping, and it's a lot of rock, and it's a lot of, it just makes you feel really good. You just can't stop after that. Why would you stop? Yeah, but guys, go ahead and check me out on all your favorite streaming places. Ashley Anomaly or Anomaly Beats, some anime stuff, and some like cookies and listening to music. And lastly, guys, like I always